After helping the father and son bury their lost wife and daughter from the last tragic battle between their now-lost clan against the Black Plague, we helped them tow their war-destroyed tank back to the garage. We didn't have much between us all, but just enough to fix up their tank. The Russians decided to join us even though their view on peace and hope didn't seem to align. Even though the Americans and us agreed to fight for peace and hope against the Black Plague, the Russians only sought revenge. We didn't blame them, but it left us wondering where this separation in views would take us. Once the Russian tank finished getting repaired, we decided to carry on to see if we could find anyone else in search for the same thing, or struggling from repression under the Black Plague. But the Russians told us of another group they knew of, but didn't know if they were still located where they had last seen them. Before the tragedy, they had separated from the other group to find and claim more land and resources faster to help themselves against any evildoers. They suggested we head to them, but a feeling of hesitation was felt among us and the Americans. We had helped them, but being led into another unknown group seemed like suicide, since trust was such a scarce thing during these times. The Russians told us that a friend of theirs would be a friend of theirs too. We decided to go in hopes we could gauge their trust of our new comrade as we crossed the plains. We fully stocked ourselves with enough resources from the garage to last us a while. Every word and movement made from the Russians was looked upon with critical consideration. Our hopes was that finding or joining any group against evil was what the Americans and us wanted and could lead us to finding the same goal in the end. During our journey, our tracks began to stick more due to the mud of much of the melted snow, but we kept moving on over the rocky and muddy plains. After a while into our travels, the Russians began to spot something and speak up. Looks like we might have trouble ahead. We take a closer look ahead and start to see the movement of another group of tanks moving towards us. We may need to prepare ourselves just in case, the Americans say as we begin to draw nigh to the unknowns. We load a shell into our cannon along with the Americans. Our gut drops as we start to see the sight of what looks like a tank destroyer coming into view from the enemy side. I'm not sure if we can take them on, a family member says in fear. Once we got into an engaging distance, our tanks come to a stop as the unnerving feeling of what's to come grows stronger. Silence looms over the field between us as we wait in anticipation for what's to happen next. "Surrender yourselves and your resources to us or we'll take them by force," we hear from one of their commanders. "We don't want to fight. We only come looking for peace and friendship," our American friends yell back, but the sound of a shell being loaded by our new Russian friends seemed to send a different message to them. A death-like silence comes over us, making it seem like eternity as our Russian friends decide to make a rash decision to take aim and suddenly fire upon one of the enemy tanks. In response, the other group begins to fire also upon us, now leading them to be our enemy. We gas it in reverse to try and get cover while firing upon the enemy as well. They begin to move into positions against us as we now know there is no turning back from the choice our side has made to fire upon them first. We luckily bounce a shell right off our turret as we roll behind cover. Our American friends move to also get cover as they too luckily bounce a shell off their side while trying to fire upon the moving targets. Our Russian friends just barely escape the penetrating blow of the enemy's tank destroyer and rolls back to fire upon them again. We load another shell as the Americans and us fire again, trying to fight for our survival. Before the tank destroyer can reload, we decide to push forward while taking fire from the others. A shot from one of the enemy tanks whizzes past our own as we barely make it behind another form of cover. Shells are heard being fired and flying all around us as we start to hear the Americans come up with a plan. We need to take out that tank destroyer if we're going to have any hope in winning this battle. The position of the tank destroyer was in, almost left them pinned down and hardly able to advance. The Russians track one of the other enemy tanks as they begin to roll around some other barriers to get a more engaged shot. After they had become disabled, we fire and eliminate to take out one of them. Just 2 more left, the Russians are heard saying over the radio. They take aim at the destroyer as it moves back to avoid from getting flanked. "We need to take out that destroyer's tracks," yells the Americans as the Russians try to flank another engaged enemy. We start to realize we're in a bad position as an enemy hits our side and damages part of our engine. We try to move from our position, but because of the now struggling engine, we get nailed again from the side, almost crippling us. The Russian tank fires back at the enemy that's holding us down and takes them out, leaving only their destroyer left. We see the destroyer start to take aim on us and fire, but barely misses us as our damaged tank is able to push itself just back enough away from the powerful shell that explodes against the rock. Just then we knew we had to act if we were going to take out that destroyer. The Russian tank begins to flank one side as the Americans tank another while aiming to try to take out its tracks. A few shots of ours fail as another loud blow rips through the Russian tank's tracks, bringing it to a halt and almost spinning it to one side. The destroyer tries to take aim on the Americans, but the Russians are luckily able to hit and bust one of the TD's tracks, leaving it almost hopeless now. The TD aims itself back at our Russian friends to try and take them out, but our American friends are able to successfully flank and take out the destroyer by blasting the side of it with a few rounds, killing their crew inside. Our damaged tank rolls over to the Russians along with the Americans as a feeling of relief comes upon us. We start our repairs, but the Americans and us realize that it might have been the Russians' decision that could have almost got them killed. But we weren't really sure, as it also could have saved them from taking the first blow. Could a first decision like that again lead them to survive? Or would it just be enough to potentially end their journey, end lives forever?